and the very thoughtful issues that he raised this morning. Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President.
Senator from Tennessee.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank the Senator from Alaska for her excellent remarks. I was glad I was here to see them. She and the Senator from Massachusetts and I all were at the hearing this morning where the head of the Center of Medicaid and Medicare Services talked about the health care law, and I thought the Senator from Alaska was especially cogent in pointing out the difficulties and the differences between those who live in Alaska and their inability to connect to the services in the new health care law. If I remember correctly, she said only 3 had been able to enroll, and she pointed out the differences in time. I'd like to spend a few minutes reflecting on what happened this morning and what I said to Ms. Tavenner, the administration's witness. I began by telling her a story about 16,000 Tennesseans who have insurance through something called Cover Tennessee, a low-cost, narrow-coverage state program. Obamacare is canceling their policies, those 16,000 policies. Cover Tennessee apparently is an example of what the President has called bad apples, an insurance plan that Washington has decided isn't good enough for you. I recently heard from one of those Tennesseans whose policy will be canceled on January 1. Her name is Emily. She's 39 years of age. She has lupus. She lives in Middle Tennessee. She told me, quote, "I can't keep my current plan because it does not meet the standards of coverage. This alone," she says, "is a travesty. Cover Tennessee has been a lifeline. With the discontinuation of Cover Tennessee, I'm being forced to purchase a plan through the exchange. My insurance premiums alone will increase a staggering 410%. My out-of-pocket expense will increase by more than $6,000 a year. That includes subsidies. Please help me understand," she writes, "how this is affordable." Madam President, our health care system makes up nearly 20% of the American economy, touching the lives of every American. And today, Obamacare is pushing that 20% of our economy in the wrong direction. As the President has said, this law is more than a website that won't work. It is a law transforming our health care system in the wrong direction by increasing premiums, canceling insurance plans, destroying relationships with doctors, raising taxes, forcing people into Medicaid, spending $500 billion Medicare dollars on a new program instead of using the money to make Medicare more solvent and encouraging employers to reduce their employees to a 30-hour work week, and having the IRS threaten to fine Americans for failing to sign up for insurance on a website that doesn't work. Now, the President has promised, and this morning I went on an iPad and read from the White House website. It does work. And the President says on that website, if you like your health care plan, you can keep it as long as you don't have to change, you can keep it, and you don't have to change a thing due to the health care law. It says if you like your health care plan, you can keep it, and you don't have to change a thing due to the health care law. But in fact, the law cancels millions of individual policies, and for millions of others, employers are dropping insurance programs as they discover the added costs of Obamacare. For these Americans, the new promise is, if you want health care, go find it on a website that the administration says won't be working properly till the end of November. That is an unwelcome Christmas present. Only 2 weeks to shop for and buy a new insurance policy by December 15th so that you're covered next year when Obamacare outlaws your policy. This administration had 3.5 years to set up the website. Millions of Americans will have 2 weeks to buy their insurance. The President put Secretary Sebelius in charge of implementing this law. I've called on her to resign because this has hurt so many Americans. Before the Internet, RCA could tell you every day how many records Elvis was selling. Ford could tell you every day how many cars they were selling. McDonald's would tell you every day how many hamburgers it sold. Congressman Issa has put on his committee website notes from meeting in the Obama administration war room where apparently they're telling each other how many people are enrolling in Obamacare. I asked Ms. Tavenner this morning if you know how many people are enrolling, how many have tried, what level of insurance are buying, in what zip code do they live. Why don't you tell us? Why don't you tell Congress? Why don't you tell the American people? She said she would tell us by the end of the month. But we need to know every day, Madam President. We need to know every week at least. Governors need to know. As they make decisions about expanding Medicaid, wouldn't it help to know how many of these new enrollees are going into Medicaid? Members of Congress need to know. We've appropriated at least $400 million for this website that doesn't work. The American people need to know. They might gain confidence in the system if they could see that every day more people were signing up for this or that. I can't get over the fact that we're not being told how many are enrolled, how many are trying, what kind of insurance are they buying, where do they live. We have a right to know that. Why doesn't the administration tell us that? One senator has described the new health care law as an approaching train wreck. I know something about trains. My grandfather was a railroad engineer in Newton, Kansas when I was a little boy. I was sure he was probably the most important person in the world sitting in that big locomotive. His job was to drive the steam engine locomotive onto what they called a round table, turn it around, and head it in the right direction. That was the only way you could turn something that big, that fast. That's what our country needs to do. We need to turn this train around. We need to turn this law around and head it in the right direction. Obamacare is the wrong direction because it expands a health care delivery system that we already knew cost too much. Now, what is the right direction? The right direction is more choices, more competition that lowers costs so more Americans can afford to buy insurance. Now, don't expect Republicans to show up on this Senate floor with our 3,000-page plan to move the health care delivery system in the way we think it ought to go. We don't believe in that approach. We're policy skeptics, you might say. We don't believe these big comprehensive plans are wise enough to do what needs to be done. Instead, we believe we should change our health care delivery system step by step. I remember during the health care debate in 2010, I counted the number of times that Republicans offered on the floor, said on the floor, our step-by-step plan to take the health care delivery system in a different direction. 173 times just during 2010. And here are some of the steps that we suggested and still do suggest that we should take to turn the train around and head it in the right direction. Make Medicare solvent. The trustees have said that in 10 years it won't have enough money to pay hospital bills. And I know plenty of Tennesseans who are counting on Medicare to pay their hospital bills. Reform Medicare Advantage to compete on a level playing field with Medicare. That would provide competition, more choices for seniors. The Congressional Budget Office says it would save taxpayers money. Make Medicaid flexible. When I was governor of Tennessee in the 80s, Medicaid was 8% of the state budget. Today, it's 26%. As a result, Democratic and Republican governors of Tennessee have been told by Washington to spend money on Medicaid that instead they would rather spend on higher education. Make Medicaid more flexible. Perhaps we can cover more people and set our own priorities. Encourage employee wellness incentives. We talk a good game in the Senate about that, but the administration's regulation actually limits the ability of employers to say to employees, if you have a healthy lifestyle, your insurance will be cheaper. That insurance provided by the employer. We should repeal that regulation, change it, make it easier for employers to encourage that kind of behavior and offer cheaper insurance. Allow small businesses to pool their resources and offer insurance together. We call that small business plans. All of these steps, by the way, are in legislative form. They're bills we have introduced. They're steps we could take today if we had enough votes to pass turning the train around and heading it in a different direction. Buy insurance across state lines. If Americans could look on the internet and buy insurance across state lines that suited their needs, made those choices, perhaps more Americans could afford insurance. And isn't that what we want to do? Change the 30-hour work week to 40 hours. Both Democrats and Republicans support this idea. I'm not sure where it ever came from, but it's one of the worst features of Obamacare. It says it creates a big incentive to cause businesses to reduce the number of working hours from 40 to 30 so their employees will be part-time and not affected, and the business won't be affected by the Obamacare rule. Well, that creates consternation within the business. It doesn't create good relations between the employer and the employee. But think about the employee. Think about the pay cut from 40 hours to 30 hours. Think about the employee going out to finding another part-time job at, say, another restaurant. Why not give these employees a 33% pay increase? That would be a pretty good way to get up above the so-called minimum wage and give businesses a chance to have full-time employees again. So these are all steps that would change the health care delivery system by changing its direction away from expanding a health care system that we know already costs too much and send it in the direction of choice and competition and finding ways to lower the cost of health care plans so more Americans can afford to buy insurance. That 39-year-old Tennessee woman who I talked about this morning to Ms. Tavener, the woman named Emily who's losing her insurance because Obamacare has decided that that plan isn't good enough for her, finished her story with these words, quote, "This is one of the biggest betrayals of our government that has ever been committed on its citizens. I beg of you to continue to fight for those like me who would only ask to be allowed to continue to have what we already enjoy, a fair health insurance plan at a fair price. Please find a way to return to affordable health care." One good way to do that is to put the President's words into law. If you like your health plan, you can keep it. Senator Johnson of Wisconsin has offered that legislation. I co-sponsor it, as others do. My message to Emily is that I'm going to do my best to turn this train around and head our health care delivery system in the right direction so that she can buy and keep health care insurance that she can afford. I thank the President, and I yield the floor, and I notice the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
No votes are scheduled in the Senate today, and there's been no announcement of a deal on amendments to the workplace anti-discrimination bill that's pending before the Senate. Congressional Quarterly writes that Republicans are proposing amendments to the bill to expand exemptions for religious employers and impose a national right-to-work law. The story goes on to say that Democrats are likely to allow votes on those amendments offered by GOP Senators Patrick Toomey of Pennsylvania, Kelly Ayotte of New Hampshire, and Rob Portman of Ohio. Some of our live coverage tomorrow, in addition to covering the Senate here on C-SPAN 2. Our Washington Journal program will be live tomorrow morning from Cushing, Oklahoma, to discuss the oil industry. With a population of less than 8,000, Cushing is considered by some to be the capital of the American oil kingdom. The community contains the country's biggest vault of U.S. oil in the country, with more than 80 million barrels. We'll be live with that on C-SPAN tomorrow morning at 7 Eastern. Now, from this morning's Washington Journal, we'll pick up where we left off on the effect of the government shutdown on immigration reform.
The group that has the least amount of access to insurance or no insurance at all are those small businesses and the people that work for those small businesses.
The president talking in Washington, D.C. about the Affordable Care Act. Want you to listen to what he has to say and get your comments on it.
Now, the other news that people have focused on lately has to do with notices that some Americans have gotten from their insurance companies suggesting that because of the Affordable Care Act, they may be losing the plan that they bought. Now, while virtually every insurer is offering new, better plans and competing for these folks' business, I realize that can be scary for people if they just get some notice like that. So we've got to make sure that we're getting them the right information. Remember that one of the reasons that we took up health care reform was not just to help the uninsured, but also the underinsured or the badly insured. People forget how unfair and unaffordable the status quo has been for millions of Americans. Millions of hardworking families who live in constant fear that just one illness or accident could cost them their home or their life savings. Sometimes, by the way, they don't know how vulnerable they are, because when you look at the fine print, it turns out that a whole bunch of things that people think are covered aren't covered. We know because we heard the stories of people saying, I've been paying premiums all these years, and suddenly I found out that I've got all these out-of-pocket expenses that I can't afford, and I'm going broke. That's part of what health care reform was about. We did this to put an end to the days when the individual market had almost no standards, when every year thousands of Americans would be dropped from their coverage.
Well, it's very different than what we heard when this law was being debated. You know, how many times have we heard if you have your insurance, you can keep your insurance? And I think what a lot of small businesses get frustrated at is, hey, wait a second, that's not what we were sold, that's not what we were buying. And by the way, we're a lot smarter than you think that we are. If we buy a plan and we like that plan and we want to keep that plan, we don't want government to tell us, oh, you guys don't know any better, that's a substandard plan, and by the way, you can't keep it anymore because that plan has changed and it doesn't meet the Obamacare standards. So I think that there is a lot of frustration out there, and I think that's going to continue into the future. Again, small businesses haven't really felt the brunt of what they possibly could be feeling in a year when that employer mandate kicks in.
But what are they saying to you in the lead-up of that?
Well, they're saying that they're very, very concerned. You know, if what we're seeing right now is previews of coming attractions, it's not looking too good. And a lot of the small businesses will say, you know what? If we have to keep employees under 30 hours and not have to participate in this plan, we're going to do that. If we have to hire less people so we don't cross the standard, we're going to do that. If this becomes too expensive, we're going to tell our employees we're canceling health insurance, we're going to pay the penalty, and they're on their own. They have to go into the exchanges. And that's not what we were promised. That's not what they expected. So hopefully they're going to get this thing together. And again, we all agree that we need reform, but this isn't the reform that a lot of small businesses thought they were going to get. Our
guest, Hector Barreto of the Latino Coalition, serves as their chairman. He was also the former administrator for the Small Business Administration from 2001 to 2006. From Twitter, someone asked you to define small business and what qualifies as a small business.
So in the United States, according to the federal regulations, we have about 28 million small businesses. And again, if you manufacture a product, if you make something and you have less than 500 employees, you could qualify as a small business. And the reason for that, by the way, is because if you're a manufacturer, most of that money goes back into producing the product. You're not talking about these huge margins, and so most of that money goes back in there so they can qualify as a small business. If you do not make something, it depends on what industry classification you have. Are you a professional service? Are you a retailer? Are you an importer, exporter? What is it that you are? And that's usually a revenue size standard. Kind of averages around $5 or $6 million a year in revenue. Most small businesses don't generate $5 or $6 million, and that's why 99% of all the businesses can be classified as a small business to get support from these government programs.
Are most of the small businesses, how many employees do they have? Is it the 500 level, or is it lower than that?
Oh, man, much smaller. Remember, we produce, or at least we used to, about 1 million new small businesses every year, and oftentimes they don't have very many employees. They may be 1 or 2 employees. It's only after they get past those first 5 years that they really start hiring people and those businesses start growing. And that's the other thing. We got to make sure that they exist past those 5 years where they really start making the contributions to the economy.
I know you're not there now, but when you were at the SBA, for those who took in loans, how many of those defaulted on those loans?
That's a very good question, and what we found out is not as many as you would think. There's always going to be a little bit of default because, remember, these are brand new businesses and they don't have a lot of the capacity. But I would tell you that when a small business gets a loan, oftentimes they've already had some technical assistance, they've already put a business plan together, and the last thing they want to do is default on that loan because the objective is to get the next loan. So you get that small loan to get started, but then after you get going, you want to go back in there and get a bigger loan and multiple loans over the course of your life.
For SBA folks who are getting these loans, what's the dollar figure usually attached to these types of loans?
Again, it ranges. A lot of these are working capital loans, and so they could be somewhere in the neighborhood of $100,000 to $250,000. And by the way, that average loan size has gone down over the time. When I first started at the SBA, we were saying loans much larger than that, and a lot of small businesses would say, I don't need a huge loan. I need a small loan to buy some inventory, to satisfy a contract, or to hire one extra person, or to buy a piece of equipment. So you've seen that go down. But SBA has a lot of different kinds of loans. They have also fixed asset loans, which can be millions of dollars, and that's to buy large equipment or to buy a building or something else that you need for your business.
Here's Jim from Gainesville, Texas. Republican line, hi.
Good morning. Hector, you've done an absolutely wonderful job of explaining some positions this morning, and I also appreciate your comments about the Affordable Health Care Act. I think you're 100% right on the points you brought up. Something I wanted to ask you, Hector, is, certainly the demographics of the U.S. are changing, and I've always felt like Latinos are natural conservatives. They're very pro-family, and by golly, I don't care how many of them it takes to make a family work, but they tend to earn money. They don't care what job they do. And as far as family goes, I want to mention something somebody else had said. That was that Latinos are a big source of youth, and we need youth to support some of our programs for seniors and whatnot. Anyway, if you could just make a few comments on anything I've said, I'd appreciate it. And thank you for everything that you've brought to the table this morning.
Thank you very much for the call. Well, obviously this is something that's near and dear to my heart. I'm very involved with the Hispanic community, and my organization, the Latino Coalition, deals with a lot of these issues. But as you said, it's the largest minority in the United States, probably somewhere around 17 to 18% of the population, over 50 million strong. By the way, it's the fastest growing part of small business in the United States. There are 3 million Hispanic-owned companies. They generate over $500 billion in revenue every year. And the demographers say those numbers could double every 5 years. So we could have 12 million Hispanic companies, and they're across the board in every part of the country. So I think that they are a big part of the solution. Oftentimes, it's misunderstood, the contributions that Hispanics make. To your point about political affiliation, I think Hispanics are very independent. And so they may be registered in a particular party. They don't always vote for that party. As you know, during George W. Bush's reelection, he got close to 44% of the Hispanic vote. That's an all-time high watermark, and we're not going to get that back unless we're doing a good job of outreaching and communicating with this growing Hispanic community. But the Hispanic community is definitely part of the solution, and it's going to continue to grow, and I think there's incredible opportunities for the Hispanic community and the general community on dealing with a lot of the issues, challenges, problems, and opportunities that this country will have in the next few years.
After the government reopened, the president wanted to see a push on immigration reform. What do you think about the efforts?
Well, we're very supportive of immigration reform, and I know that there's a lot of, debate on this. I wish that we were getting more progress on this front. And again, I think that what a lot of people say on either party is, it's time for us to stop kicking this can down the road. We need a logical, common sense immigration solution. There's been good ideas proffered by both sides. We had a bipartisan bill come out of the Senate. Obviously, it's not making very much progress in the House. But this is going to have to be dealt with at some point in time. And a lot of times people don't understand, immigrants that come to this country make incredible contributions. 40% of the Fortune 500 companies were created, started, built by immigrants. Those immigrants have created trillions of dollars worth of revenue and millions of jobs. And we need to concentrate on some of the great things that immigrants bring to this country. And by the way, we're going to need immigrants in the future, especially in science and technology, to enable our economy to continue growing. So this is not a one-time issue. This is an issue that we're going to have to deal with for a long time.
So what's the best approach in your opinion?
Well, I think they say in Washington, D.C., neither side's going to get what they want. There's going to have to be some kind of consensus. I'd like to see a comprehensive solution, but maybe with the environment here, we're not going to be able to do anything big, so we're going to have to take this in stages. Some people in our community say this might be like the civil rights, effort, where you didn't get a big civil rights bill. You did that over a period of time, over a decade, and it was, multiple bills. And we might have to look at that to get some solutions, some progress on immigration. At the end of the day, we need an immigration system that works in this country, and what we have right now does not work for anybody.
So for those here who aren't supposed to be here, what should happen to them? For immigrants who are here that shouldn't be here,
well,
what should happen?
I think that we're going to have to deal with the reality that we have 12 million people here, and they're not going anywhere. And if you really press an elected official and say, what do you want to do with those 12 million people? Nobody's going to say, we got to find them and round them up and get them out of the country. That's just not going to happen. So we have to deal with reality, and we have to find some way to normalize their relationship. And maybe that's not citizenship, but it shouldn't be 12 million people living in the shadows, not making the contributions that they could be making to this country. It's not fair to them, and it's definitely not fair to our country.
Marco Rubio making some news saying that he's backing off the sense of comprehensive immigration report, preferring the piecemeal approach on the House side.
I think Marco has said before that he always felt that there was an opportunity to do some progress and maybe do it in pieces. He did support the comprehensive solution. He was optimistic. He gave it everything he can. And I appreciate his leadership. I think that he took a lot of risk. He took a lot of hits to do that. But at the end of the day, you're not doing that just to, promote your own career. You're doing it because you really believe that's the best thing for this country. And we need more people that think like that.
What do you think the House is going to produce when it comes to immigration?
Well, you've heard signs that have come out there. Speaker Boehner has said that he would like to see something done. I've heard Leader Cantor say things along that nature as well. Again, I don't think that there's the appetite, unfortunately, in the House to do anything large. Hopefully, we can get something out this year. Maybe something on the DREAM Act. Maybe something on agricultural workers. Maybe something on high-tech workers. Maybe something that continues to strengthen our border. Every country has to make sure that they have a secure border, and we can do better than what we've done before.
You're a supporter of DREAM Act?
Absolutely. And again, it depends on what DREAM Act you're talking about. There's a lot of different versions that are out there. But I think that something should be done. A lot of these folks, they came here through no fault of their own. They came with their parents. This is the only country they've known. They're studying, they're working, and they have contributions to make to this country.
Sydney, Ohio. Charles on our independent line. Thanks for waiting.
Yes.
You're on. Go ahead.
I have some questions. Why didn't they give the stimulus to the people, the normal people, instead of the rich? Why did we have to bail out Wall Street? And, on another note, the Affordable Health Care Act, I agree everybody needs health care. But the prices that I'm hearing are outrageous. for the average person. You know, not everybody makes $250,000 a year. They're tossing around these large figures in the millions and billions and trillions like it's nothing. So
We'll leave it there, caller. Thanks.
Well, I think there's two different points there. With regards to stimulus, I agree. You know, I think when they first did this $1 trillion stimulus program, they told us there was going to be a lot of shovel-ready jobs and a lot of money was going to go into infrastructure and all this stuff. And what we found out is that just wasn't true. So, you know, unfortunately, a lot of money was spent on things that didn't create jobs and didn't spur economic activity. So that was something that I think a lot of us were disappointed in. With regards to health care, I totally agree with you. You know, the irony of this whole Affordable Care Act is it's not affordable, and even if it was implemented successfully, there's still going to be something like 30 million people that won't have health insurance. So, you know, at the end of this experiment, what we know is it's going to cost us more, and hopefully we don't have more people that are left without insurance. I think when you add up the trillions of dollars that are going to go into producing this product, it would have been cheaper to give everybody that didn't have insurance some kind of a coupon to go out and buy insurance than to try to change the system for everybody else. So again, this is you know, still a work in progress. Hopefully it's a work in progress and it's going to get better. But you know, I think it's going to also, we're going to be hearing more of these stories of millions of people getting kicked off of their insurance, millions of people having their premiums go up. And you know, the other thing is, to make this work, you're going to have young, healthy people go into the system, and we're just not sure that that's going to happen. A young, healthy person probably is not going to spend, you know, hundreds of dollars to buy health insurance. They'll probably, you know, pay the penalty and go on some kind of an exchange. So, you know, I don't think that we know the full extent of what the implications are, and we're just going to have to monitor this closely. And if it's not working, I think both sides have to come together and start coming up with some, you know, common sense solutions of things that will work and provide people that affordable care that we all want.
Our last call for our guest comes from Tallahassee, Florida. This is Will, Democrats line.
Yes, sir. How you doing?
Good.
I got a comment and a question. My question is, if a small business that's owned by a Republican can't make its payroll, okay, it goes to the bank and it borrows money to be able to make its payroll, okay, what is the difference between that and the government bailing out a big corporation that was fixing to go under? What is the difference?
Well, you know, I want to make sure I understand your question. First of all, you know, if a business is struggling, what you find out it's very difficult for them to get a loan. You know, oftentimes, unfortunately, the only time your business is going to get a loan is if you can really prove that the business is growing, it's successful, and you're going to be able to service that debt. By the way, I don't think any banker or any government agency ever asks you what your political affiliation is before they, you know, look at you for that loan or something else that you could possibly get. With regards to the bailouts, and again, there's been a lot of conversation, a lot of debate on that. You know, there was an argument that was made that some of these industries, you may disagree with this, needed to be bailed out so that everybody could have an economy, so that everybody didn't go under, and especially when we had the financial downturn. Now, you can look at specific industries and say, well, do we really need to bail out this industry or not? And this has become a very controversial issue, because I think I think it's going to be harder for industries, companies, states, cities to be coming to the government saying, I need a bailout because I made some bad decisions. And so, I think we're going to look at those on a case-by-case basis, but I don't think there's an appetite any longer in this country. And by the way, there's no money to bail anybody out. You know, we're trying to make sure that our national economy, our national government stays afloat, and we've got some serious fiscal issues that we're going to have to tackle in the years to come.
Former administrator of the Small Business Administration and current chairman of the Latino Coalition, Hector Barreto, our guest. Thank you.
Thank you.
program. A few minutes ago, we were watching Washington Journal, part of Washington Journal from this morning. Tomorrow morning, our Washington Journal program will be live from Cushing, Oklahoma, to discuss the oil industry. Cushing has the largest oil vault in the country. That'll be live at 7 Eastern on C-SPAN. And later on tonight, once the polls close, we'll bring you live election results on the governor's races in Virginia and New Jersey. We'll have victory and concession speeches and your calls and tweets. That's on C-SPAN tonight, starting at 9 Eastern, also on C-SPAN Radio and cspan.org. The pending legislation in the Senate is a bill that would prohibit discrimination against gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender workers. We talk with a reporter about the measure.
Congress for Politico, in particular covering the debate in the Senate on the Employee Non-Discrimination Act. Tell us about this bill, what's in it, and some of its background. It's been before Congress before.
It has been. I mean, the last time the Senate took up a version of this legislation, it was back in 1996, and it failed to pass by one vote. The House took up a similar version back in 2007, but that was the last time that this version, which would ban workplace discrimination on basis of sexual orientation or gender identity, 2007 was the last time it came up in either chamber. So that's why the legislation moving forward last night on a 61-30 vote is a big deal, even if it does face pretty dim prospects in the House.
Well, your headline in Politico of your piece says the gay rights measure advances in the Senate, and you write about some of the dynamics of that vote, both on and off the floor. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so it was always going to be a question as to which Republican senators were going to come forward and help advance the bill. I mean, the legislation does have two Republican co-sponsors, Susan Collins of Maine and Mark Kirk of Illinois, who have been very vocal advocates for the legislation. There were two other Republicans who had voted for it in the committee and were expected to help push the bill along. But throughout the day yesterday, there were a lot of question marks on some of the Republicans. In particular, we were looking at Rob Portman of Ohio throughout the day yesterday, as well as Kelly Ayotte of New Hampshire and Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania. And during the vote last night, there was a fascinating behind-the-scenes lobbying effort right on the Senate floor. Us reporters were up in the gallery watching the votes, and those three key Republicans were huddling in the cloakroom with Susan Collins and Jeff Merkley, a Democrat from Oregon who was the chief sponsor of the legislation. And then at one point, Chuck Schumer, the number 3 Democrat, goes over there, and they're kind of working behind the scenes to try to secure their votes so that they could at least move forward on the bill last night.
Well, in working to secure those votes, did Senator Toomey or any of the other Republican senators get any sort of commitments for amendment votes?
They did. So there's going to be, Kelly Ayotte and Rob Portman secured a vote on their amendment that deals more with anti-retaliation issues for religious groups. And they look at it as a way of strengthening protections for religious organizations in the Employee Non-Discrimination Act. Senator Toomey is going to have another religious-related amendment. It's going to broaden the number of groups that qualify under that religious exemption. Senator Merkley, who is kind of the bellwether for this, since he is the chief sponsor, he said last night that he supports the proposal from Ayotte and Portman. Not so sure about Toomey. So that the fate of that legislation is, the fate of that measure is still unclear, but they will get votes on both of them.
Well, will the Senate vote on this bill before Thanksgiving?
That's the plan. You know, Majority Leader Harry Reid said we're going to get this done. I mean, please, he said the senators, he doesn't believe senators need to use all the time that's left on the clock for debate on this bill. I mean, it's set to, I mean, after you vote on these couple amendment votes, it's set to pass, you know, in the coming days. We don't know exactly when. But the Senate also has a lot of other agenda items to do as well. So I think Harry Reid really wants to move along on ENDA, get that out of the way, and move on to something else.
Well, you wrote about some of the rather bleak prospects in the House, and then you tweeted yesterday about Senator Harkin saying that he wants the House Democrats to circulate a discharge petition on ENDA in the House. What does that mean?
So a discharge petition, if you get 218 signatures on that, it pretty much forces the bill to the House floor. Obviously, the House Republican leadership controls what bills that come on the floor, but not if a discharge petition successfully gets 218 votes. Their House Democrats aren't for sure going to do that option yet, but a spokesman for House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi said, quote, all options are on the table to try to push ENDA forward through in the House. The House version of ENDA has 193 co-sponsors, including 5 Republicans. So it's a matter of finding the additional signatures to get to that discharge petition if Democrats choose to go that way. And we'll go. Discharge petitions, however, are pretty difficult, especially for, you know, it would be difficult for Republicans to sign one kind of bucking their, you know, party's leadership on the bill.
You can follow the reporting of Sungmin Kim at Politico.com, also on Twitter. Thanks for the update.
Thanks for having me.
And here's how the Associated Press is writing about the bill we just heard about that's pending in the Senate. Invoking the Declaration of Independence, proponents of a bill that would outlaw discrimination against gays in the workplace argued on Tuesday that the measure is rooted in fundamental fairness for all Americans. Republican opponents of the measure were largely silent, neither addressing the issue on the second day of Senate debate nor commenting unless asked. Written statements from some of them rendered their judgment that the bill would result in costly, frivolous lawsuits and mandate federal law based on sexuality. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid said a final vote in the Senate is possible by the end of the week.
Consent to call the quorum be terminated.
Without objection.
I now ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to pre morning business. Senators permitted to speak for 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to executive session to consider calendars number 393 through 402 and 419. and that all nominations on the Secretary's desk in the Air Force, Army, and Navy, that the nominations be confirmed en bloc. The motion be considered made and laid on the table with no intervening action or debate. No further motions being ordered to any of the nominations. Any related statements be printed in the record, and that President Obama be immediately notified of the Senate's action in the Senate, then resume legislative session.
Without objection.
I ask consent that we now proceed to calendar number 231.
The clerk will report.
Calendar number 231, H.R. 2747, an act to amend Title 40, United States Code, to transfer certain functions from the Government Accountability Office to the Department of Labor, and so forth.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask further, Madam President, the bill be read a third time pass, motion be considered made and laid on the table, and that there be no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to S.Res. 286.
The clerk will report.
S.Res. 286, congratulating Oracle Team USA for winning the 34th America's Cup.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motion to reconsider be considered laid on the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to S.Res. 287.
The clerk will report.
S.Res. 287, congratulating the Boston Red Sox on winning the 2013 World Series.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the motion.
I further ask the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motion reconsider be made and laid on the table. There be no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
Madam President, if it were in order, which is not, I would ask that the record be spread, this resolution we just passed, with the name Tim Mitchell on it, because I followed baseball from the time I was a little boy, and I consider myself a fan of baseball, love baseball, but I have never known a more rabid fan of a baseball team than Tim Mitchell, who is we depend on so very, very much to help us work through all the things we do here in the Senate. He is a fan bordering on illness, supporting this team. He has a Red Sox tie, pen. I expect next to see if he lift up his shirt, he'd have a tattoo of Red Sox. But anyway, so, Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business day, adjourn until 10:30 a.m. on Wednesday, November 6th, and that following the prayer and the pledge, the morning hour be deemed expired. Journal proceedings be approved to date. The time for the two leaders be reserved for the use later in the day. The following leader marks the motion to proceed to S. 815, the Employee Non-Discrimination Act, be agreed to in the Senate. Begin consideration of the bill.
Without objection.
If there's no further business come before the Senate, I ask that it adjourn under the previous order. 8.
Senate stands adjourned until 10:30 a.m. tomorrow.
So that wraps up another day in the Senate. Lawmakers continuing work on ENDA, legislation that would outlaw discrimination against LGBT workers based on sexual preference or gender identity. One of the bill's sponsors, Oregon's Jeff Merkley, came to the floor to talk about